All right. Ian.
Yeah.
This was news that came up that was kind of surprising, but kind of cool. We can shoot this off in a different direction here. Not as cool as plush abs, though. N64 games could be coming to the PS5 and PS4. PS4 reportedly getting 2 classic N64 games this month. This is from comicbook.com. So what's going on is that it was discovered last July out of nowhere. Trophies for Turok were posted to the back end of the PlayStation Network. At the time, trophies didn't pop for the sequel, but many expected the pair of games would come together in remastered form because that's how they were recently released in Xbox One and Nintendo Switch. So they're referring to the original Turok Dinosaur Hunter that came out in 97. Via Iguana. Remember Iguana Entertainment? Did the NBA Jam port. And
they're a subdivision of Acclaim, I believe.
So it's interesting because we're getting to that mode where these classic retro games are no longer just purely being associated. This happened for a few years now. They're not purely being associated with that original console. They're spinning off and getting re-releases. They're getting other consoles. I mean, you have the Rare games now are showing up on Microsoft consoles, for example. Yeah,
it's strange because I think for a long time, people associated Rare with Nintendo, specifically the Nintendo 64. If you had mentioned Banjo-Kazooie, say, before the Xbox One generation, I think people probably would have looked at that as, not a Nintendo property, but close to it, a second-party game, essentially, on the Nintendo 64. But now as, Rare has, aligned essentially with Microsoft, they put this out. Now people are starting to think of, games like Banjo-Kazooie, they're associating them with the Xbox. At this point now they're associating them with the Switch again because of Smash Brothers. So it's interesting to see these games that were made by, I guess, second-party companies at the time, or even third-party in the case of Acclaim, but the game was only for the 64, get new life again on other consoles and kind of change how we remember them.
Yeah, so the big first one was Rare Replay? Would you say to be the big first one? Was like, well, this is the first time we're seeing a lot of retro games from various consoles from under one dev at the time now is being released. Here, NES games. Was there any Super Nintendo games in there? I forget, but NES, N64, and other games that
definitely NES and N64. I don't think there was necessarily anything Super Nintendo on there.
Yeah, we got Cobra Triangle was on there.
I think so. Yeah,
and Snake Rattle and Roll
was on there. Snake Rattle and Roll was on there.
Obviously, Battletoads you got going on. So yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. So that's going to be a thing that happens, and it looks like the Turok 2. So the other thing is that you have these companies from we were seeing this with with these companies gobbling up these old IPs like Pico Interactive. Well, in this case, these are IPs that are more worthy. So if these companies are sold or these IPs are sold, you're more likely to see these appear elsewhere. They're not tied. I think people sometimes incorrectly tie games to the console when they realize that, well, they're not made by the people making the console.
They tie it to the console as opposed to the developer.
Yeah, like Contra is not a Nintendo game.
Right.
It appeared on a Nintendo console, but Contra can appear anywhere else.
I find that this happens the most, more than any other system. I know I've brought it up on here before, but with Atari, you go, oh, yeah, Atari. And people go, I love Atari games. Pitfall and Kaboom. And it's like, no, you're listing Activision titles.
Pac-Man? No.
Pac-Man? Yeah, nope.
No, keep going.
That's exactly.
I'll tell you when to stop.
It's not that Atari didn't have any good games. They sure did. They had stuff like Centipede and Asteroid.
Yeah, Circus.
Yeah, I like Circus Atari quite a bit.
Can't even say with a straight face. I like the name.
But yeah, I mean, they had their own games, but they're not. First of all, the weird thing for me with Atari was their best games, Atari's best games, never translated well to their home consoles because their arcade games always had usually fairly unique control setups. Yes. Multiple buttons for Asteroids, trackballs for Centipede and Missile Command, spinners for things like Tempest and Gravitar. So I think Gravitar had a spinner. Yeah. So
Asteroids kind of worked though, because Asteroids was just rotating and thrust.
you can absolutely make Asteroids work.
And back might have been hyperspace. Down might have been hyperspace. I forget.
I mean, you would have been getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You had 5 switches, so
that works. Atari, you couldn't think of a second button? Like, just one more button, buddies. You would have done so much more with one more button. Just one.
Did you ever play... speaking of like getting past that one button hurdle, did you ever play Ghostbusters or really play Raiders of the Lost Ark on the Atari?
Oh no, I'm sure that's hell on earth. Though.
Oh, you have to sit in front of the system, like
oh, with the switch.
When you play you play Ghostbusters, you like flip the switch to bring up one inventory, you hit another switch to it's absolutely insane.
So Atari put 6 switches on the front of their console, like 3 of which you probably never used, but one button on their joystick. I don't want to turn this into an Atari bash session, but oh my god, one button. That was like they were the last ones to do that. I believe one button. After that, they figured that out. After that, like, what? This is crazy. The Odyssey 2 had 2 buttons, didn't it? Or was that one?
Odyssey 2 had 2 buttons. 5200 had 2 buttons too.
And then the keypad. Everyone else had the keypads. So it was really Atari. That was it.
Technically, the 5200 had 4 buttons, but I think it was just the same 2 buttons repeated on each.
But none worked, so it doesn't count.
No,
I mean, like
no, they did. They didn't.
The side buttons never worked. You had the claw going. And
fucking mushy ass side buttons.
Sorry, Atari. Give me 2 buttons, buddies.
Man,
so we're talking about we're spun this out of control. So the whole point is that this has become more and more news about these old retro properties that appear in these consoles that they didn't originally. The company they appear on, there's no connection anymore. Right, it's happening more and more.
Yeah, if there's ever a GoldenEye remake fully released, if that were to ever happen, that would be another instance of it. We were talking about that last week. Would have put that on the 360, you would have lost the Nintendo, the association.
Yeah, that's a mess. There's like 3 or 4 different rights you have to clear for that. Are you a fan of the original Turok? I remember playing a little bit. My cousin had it because they had every game, those 3.
I played it briefly. I remember going, oh, this is interesting. I like the idea of running around hunting dinosaurs, but
the people know what Turok was when that game came out. I know it was.
I don't think they did.
The Valiant comic was pretty big, but Valiant was already starting to die out by '97.
I'll be perfectly honest with you. I didn't know it was based on a comic until I met Vonnie, probably.
You can say Valiant was the original Pico Interactive. They just took all these characters out of mothballs that no one cared about for 30 years and reintroduced them.
Yes.
With Solar, Solar, Turok. These are all Charleston and other comics from the 50s and early 60s. Was the Magnus Robot Fighter, another one. These were all characters no one cared about anymore, and they reintroduced them into their own universe. I liked Harbinger, though. They're sort of X-Men ripoff, but almost X-Men. I forget the difference between them and X-Men, but they're basically X-Men. They're more like grounded powers. They're not shooting laser beams out of their eyes with that. Sorry. People loved Valiant back for those 3 years.
They did the Nintendo comics.
But yeah, before.
No, those were fun.
That was it. They built their bones on Nintendo and then came out with Magnus Robot Fighter to carry the torch.
Exo Man of War.
He didn't exist, but that was a new one. That's an Iron. How did they do an Iron Man crossover with that? The video game. How did that happen?
I have no idea.
Why would Marvel was really in bad shape in the late 90s. I guess they were signing up. They were going bankrupt. Like, yeah, sure. We'll do it with a competitor.
It's a Game Boy game, too. Was there a Super Nintendo version as well?
It was a PlayStation or Saturn, or one of those disc consoles. But that to me was always shocking that there was an Exo Man of War, because it's basically Iron Man. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, Iron Man, Exo Man of War in heavy metal. It was on the Saturn as well.
The Saturn, that's what it was. Yeah, that makes no sense at all, because there was never a comic crossover between Marvel and Valiant that I know of.
God, that game looks real bad.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, I think that's something that people also don't realize in this age of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is Iron Man was not a huge character until the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
He was a B player. It was always B.
I mean, he was around. People liked him, but he wasn't.
He was B.
He was not the A. Yeah, he was not.
Wasn't even B plus. He was B.
He was not an A-team player until.
Yeah, he was
at least in my memory. He was not until the
he's
movies.
Second tier with Daredevil. Mm-hmm. You know, like these are second tier characters, for sure. All right, that's all the juice we got out of this topic. We barely talked about Turok at all.
Hey, we squozed the juice. We squozed it.